The 3 discernment questions. Every generation faces deception, but this generation faces something deeper, a spiritual current shaping culture beneath the surface. Scripture calls it the mystery of lawlessness, a hidden influence that bends thinking, blurs boundaries, and erodes clarity. 3 discernment is the spirit-given ability to see the architecture behind the moment, not just the moment itself. And discernment begins with 3 simple, powerful questions. Does this produce order or confusion? 6. Does this strengthen accountability or remove it? Does this align with God's design or distort it? These questions are not political. They are spiritual diagnostics, tools for identifying the signature of the Spirit behind a decision, trend, or cultural shift. When you apply these 3 questions, patterns become visible that were hidden before. Order versus confusion. God's Spirit produces order, clarity, stability, and peace. The spirit of lawlessness produces confusion, contradiction, and instability. Confusion is not neutral, it is a spiritual atmosphere. When a society begins to normalize confusion, discernment recognizes the pattern. When definitions blur, roles blur, or boundaries blur, discernment asks, is this the fruit of clarity or the fruit of confusion? Confusion is not a political issue, it is a spiritual indicator. Wherever confusion increases, deception is nearby. Accountability versus removal of accountability. Every righteous system, families, communities, institutions, requires accountability. Accountability is not punishment, it is protection. The spirit of lawlessness always works to remove accountability. It weakens guardrails. It removes checks. It dissolves consequences. It blurs responsibility. Discernment asks, does this decision increase responsibility or eliminate it? When accountability collapses, deception grows quickly. When consequences disappear, confusion multiplies. When systems lose structure, people lose stability. Alignment versus distortion of God's design. God's design is woven into creation, identity, relationships, boundaries, justice, order. When something aligns with God's design, it produces health and clarity. When something distorts God's design, it produces confusion and conflict. Discernment doesn't attack people, it evaluates patterns. Is this consistent with how God created things to function? If the answer is no, then the spirit behind it is not the spirit of truth. Distortion is not random, it is strategic. Real-world patterns without naming politics. Discernment does not need to name political issues. It simply recognizes spiritual patterns. When boundaries are removed in places where boundaries once protected people, discernment notices. When accountability is weakened in systems that require oversight, discernment notices. When natural distinctions are blurred in ways that create confusion, discernment notices. When processes lose transparency or checks, discernment notices. These are not political statements. These are spiritual patterns Scripture warns about. The spirit of lawlessness always pushes toward boundary removal, confusion, and disorder. The signature of the spirit of lawlessness. Lawlessness is not merely breaking rules. It is rejecting God's right to rule. It works quietly, subtly, gradually, like rot behind a wall. It normalizes what once shocked. It celebrates what once convicted. It confuses what once was clear. It makes sin appear compassionate and holiness appear hateful. It makes truth sound offensive and lies sound enlightened. These are not political symptoms. They are spiritual fingerprints. The remnant assignment. The remnant is not called to rage. The remnant is not called to panic. The remnant is not called to fight people. The remnant is called to see clearly. Discernment is clarity in a confused age. Discernment is stability in a shaking world. Discernment is alignment in a distorted culture. Discernment is the opposite spirit of lawlessness. The final collision. The spirit of lawlessness is rising. The spirit of discernment is rising with it. One prepares the world for deception. The other prepares the church for endurance. And the dividing line between the two is becoming unmistakable. The remnant will not be confused. The remnant will not be deceived. The remnant will not be swept into the current of the age. Because the remnant has learned to ask three simple questions. Questions that reveal the spirit behind the moment. And in the days ahead, those questions will be the difference between clarity and confusion, truth and deception, stability and collapse. The three-legged stool of discernment. Order versus confusion. The first leg of the stool is order, God's signature. Confusion is the opposite, the signature of the spirit of lawlessness. Discernment asks, does this produce order or confusion? If a decision, trend, or cultural shift creates instability, contradiction, or chaos, that leg of the stool is weakened. And when order collapses, deception enters. Accountability versus removal of accountability. The second leg is accountability, the guardrail God built into every righteous system. Families need it. Churches need it. Communities need it. The spirit of lawlessness always tries to remove it. Discernment asks, does this strengthen accountability or remove it? When accountability disappears, consequences disappear. When consequences disappear, confusion multiplies. A stool without this leg cannot stand. Alignment versus distortion of God's design. The third leg is alignment, staying consistent with God's created order. God's design is woven into identity, relationships, boundaries, justice, and truth. The spirit of lawlessness works to distort that design. Discernment asks, does this align with God's design or distort it? When something contradicts God's design, it may look compassionate, progressive, or enlightened, but spiritually, it is a distortion. And a stool with a distorted leg will always tip. The stool as a whole, why it matters. Discernment is not suspicion. It is not cynicism. It is not political. Discernment is the ability to see the spirit behind the moment. And these three legs, order, accountability, alignment, form the foundation that keeps the church stable in a lawless age. Remove one leg and the stool wobbles. Remove two and it collapses. Remove all three and confusion becomes the culture. The remnant's call. The remnant is not called to rage. The remnant is not called to panic. The remnant is not called to fight people. The remnant is called to stand on all three legs. To see clearly. To discern wisely. To remain stable when the world is shaking. Because discernment is the opposite spirit of lawlessness. And in the days ahead, the church will need all three legs firmly in place. Does this produce order or confusion? Does this strengthen accountability or remove it? Does this align with God's design or distort it? Leg 1. Does this produce order or confusion? Discernment begins with fruit. God's Spirit produces order, clarity, stability, and peace. The spirit of lawlessness produces confusion, contradiction, and instability. This question exposes the atmosphere behind the decision. If the result is confusion, the stool is already wobbling. Leg 2. Does this strengthen accountability or remove it? Accountability is God's built-in guardrail for families, communities, and systems. When accountability increases, righteousness strengthens. When accountability is removed, deception grows. This question reveals whether the decision protects or erodes responsibility. If accountability weakens, the second leg is compromised. Leg 3. Does this align with God's design or distort it? This is the deepest question. God's design is woven into creation, identity, relationships, boundaries, justice, truth. Alignment produces health, clarity, and stability. Distortion produces confusion, conflict, and long-term harm. This question uncovers whether the decision flows with God's created order or fights against it. If it distorts God's design, the third leg is broken. The three questions of discernment. 1. Does this produce order or confusion? Every spirit leaves fingerprints. God's Spirit produces order, clarity, stability, and peace. The spirit of lawlessness produces confusion, contradiction, and instability. This question reveals the atmosphere behind the action. If the result is confusion, something deeper is off. 2. Does this strengthen accountability or remove it? Accountability is God's built-in guardrail for families, communities, and systems. When accountability increases, righteousness strengthens. When accountability is removed, deception grows. This question exposes whether the decision protects or erodes responsibility. If accountability weakens, the foundation is already cracking. 3. Does this align with God's design or distort it? This is the deepest question. God's design is woven into creation: identity, relationships, boundaries, justice, truth. Alignment produces health and stability. Distortion produces confusion and long-term harm. This question uncovers whether the action flows with God's created order or fights against it. If it distorts God's design, the spirit behind it is not the spirit of truth. Thanks for watching. If this brought clarity, take a moment to like, share, or leave a comment. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next teaching. It strengthens the work and helps this reach those who need it.